Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? With silver bells, and cockle shells, and pretty maids all in a row. I think that came out of a primer from the first grade or so. And I've heard it a lot of times since then. 2 years ago, as part of our birthday celebration, as part of our anniversary celebration, Annette and I were invited to spend a week in New York with some friends. They were very close friends, people we have known for 53 or 54 years. That doesn't suggest that we're that old, but we've known them for that long. And we had looked forward to this because we had lived in Westchester County, just north of the city, several years ago. And while we had visited the city often, there were things in New York that we simply could not afford to do with the family. And so, after all of those years, and with some very close friends, we were going back. We were going back to the city to see the things that the children would not like to have seen, but nevertheless we wanted to see. It was a wonderful celebration. It started on Friday, and it went to the next Friday. I guess that's maybe more than 5 days or so. But wonderful. And so one of the things we decided to do was on the first day, Saturday morning, or Sunday morning, I'm sorry, we would go to the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. Some of you will know this cathedral. It is the episcopal seat it's the seat for the episcopals in New York City. But St. John the Divine, that cathedral, is the largest Gothic cathedral in the world. It is said that the Statue of Liberty could stand under the dome in that cathedral. It is huge. The cathedral is over 600 feet long. That's big. And in addition to that, it has these magnificent gardens all around it, plus some administrative buildings and buildings to support the gardens itself. So we had really looked forward to doing that. One of the interesting things about this cathedral is on its cornerstone, it is charted as a place of worship or a house of worship for all people. This cornerstone was laid over a century ago. Now immediately, when we hear the words, a place of worship or a house of prayer for all people, we think about Jesus' words as he cleansed the temple, as he chased out the money changers and the merchants. My Father intended this to be a house of prayer for all nations. But we were struck by the size and the beauty of this cathedral, its gardens. The altar accommodated us with a full orchestra, a full choir, and about 100 worshipers doing evening song or evening prayers that Sunday. But as we left the cathedral, which is located in Morningside Heights up in New York, near Harlem, we started to think about what would happen the next day and what we were going to see. We were going to visit the site of 9/11 down in Wall Street. And as we were finishing dinner, the question came up, not only with us, but people who were sitting at the table next to us. What shall we do about all this violence? For the people who were sitting next to us had been in the cathedral that afternoon or that evening also. And being struck by the beauty, we were struck by how we as human beings could create this magnificent structure. So many things, the advances in science and medicine, the advances in the arts, how we could create all of this and in another moment be so violent toward each other. That struck us. And that was a conversation for 2 or 3 tables in the restaurant. Why such violence? And the question becomes, what is our role in all of this? How should we think about this? How should we act? What are the expectations that God has of us? What did Christ teach? We have to pay attention to such violence. It's easy for us to think about September 11 when 2 planes were flown into the towers of the World Trade Center. It's easy for us to think about a lone veteran who used common farm fertilizer to blow up a federal building, killing dozens of people. It's easy for us to think about Sandy Hook, a grade school in Connecticut, where 6- and 7-year-olds, along with their teachers, were killed. It's easy for us to think about the civil rights movement, where hundreds of people died for the right to vote. It's getting more and more difficult, however, for us to think about the COVID-19 pandemic and the violence that is associated with that. Look at your TVs. Look at your headlines. I dare you to look at those and not be able to think about them and be bothered by that. It's easy for us to think about the knee on the neck of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, or police sitting in their cars who were shot. The millions of people who've been demonstrating around the world, those demonstrations that inevitably have attracted violence. When someone, however, is intent on mayhem with hatred in their hearts, they will always find a way to perpetrate violence on others. They will always find a way to weaponize the gifts that God has given through us. Guns, planes, knives, fertilizer, billy clubs, pickup trucks, cars, and even trains, they will always find a way. Inevitably, the question comes back to us, how does Jesus deal with violence? What is his expectations of us? What does Jesus teach to us about violence and cruelty? What does he teach about our attitudes towards strangers, those who look different from us? We see often, and we chuckle, the words on people's sweatshirts or t-shirts, WWJD. What would Jesus do? Questions make sense. We have an idea, but practically, how do we do this? Today's gospel provides some answers to this question. In the first lesson, the parable of the vineyard, Jesus draws upon this. This is in Isaiah 5, about the vineyard itself. But something goes terribly wrong. They don't get the grapes that was intended. They get sour grapes or wild grapes. They are bitter. But Jesus again provides an interesting answer to the question, how should we respond? In Isaiah, we were told, as you heard, that God expects for a harvest from Israel, a harvest from Judah. This harvest should be one of love, mercy, forgiveness, compassion, wisdom, healing, joy. Should I go on? In today's parable, the messenger of the owners are beaten and killed. First one group, and then a second group. When the owner sends his own son, he too is beaten, tossed out, and killed. This may be a prophetic statement as to what will happen. God sends prophets, and they are ignored, and they are killed. In fact, Jerusalem was known as a very dangerous place for prophets, because many of them were killed. But then God sends his own son. He is not believed, and he also is killed. The produce of the vineyards are fine. It's not an issue. The problem is with the tenants themselves. These were extremely violent tenant farmers, harming and killing the owner's messengers. The rationale for their brutality and for their murderous ways was stated in this passage. This is the owner's heir. Come, let us kill him and get his inheritance. Jesus was living in a time, or this passage was spoken during a time and in a culture of shame and honor. Landlords could rightfully expect that his son, his emissary, would receive proper respect and would not be harmed. Leasing of land to tenant farmers was a common practice in the first century Palestine. Landowners could expect tenants to turn over a portion of their crop at harvest. Those who failed to meet the landowner's standard or expectations would be removed from the land by people who were paid to use force to remove them as necessary. But in this passage, It is the people listening to Jesus who respond to the question, what will the owners do about dishonest tenants? They say that the answer to violence is probably more violence. And we see that death is on the horizon. Does this sound familiar? These days, we do frequently answer violence or deal with violence with more violence. We fight fire with fire. We believe at times an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. We fail to remember or fail to read the rest of that passage, that vengeance does not belong to us. But Jesus responds to violence with nonviolence and with peace, even to the point of death on the cross. Two contrary ideas, like Mary, quite contrary. All of these things take place following what we now call Palm Sunday. Jesus enters Jerusalem triumphantly and goes immediately to the temple and turns over the table of the money changers and the merchants. He chases them out. Ah, you say, Jesus is angry and he is violent. What can he tell us about not being violent? But no one is killed during this episode. No one is harmed during this encounter. So when Jesus turns over these tables, he is overcoming the tools that are used to keep people poor, to keep people in poverty. He is overturning a portion of a corrupt system. The blind and the lame come to Jesus as a result of this. The blind and the lame and the poor people are able to offer sacrifices because they no longer have to go through the exchange system with their high and expensive change rates. The lame and the sick are given the opportunity to worship in the temple where they have otherwise been excluded. Jesus, in his response to violence, was working to remove barriers to justice. Jesus responds also with truth-telling. He seeks justice where injustice has passed from one generation to another. This is predictable. We know that today because psychologists and psychiatrists will tell us that we pass certain attitudes toward people and toward things unconsciously, in the subconscious. We pass them through our gestures, we pass them through our language, we pass them through our environment. Those people we select to bring in or those people we don't select. This is a theory that most of you will know based on C.G. Jung's work. Jesus responds also in the temple with truth-telling. He tells people the truth about the Roman occupation, the truth about the chief priests and the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He sought to bring in the marginalized, to open up that community to the rest of the community. Jesus starts teaching and telling people again the truth. And after he is killed in the parable, Jesus responds to the violence by working towards justice. Jesus again asks the crowd, what will the master do after the son has been killed? And they respond that the proper response to violence to these despicable people, these disgusting people, these people who are disobedient to God, is more violence. Kill them. How many of us respond to violence with more violence? With unkind word, with harsher word, violent language that breeds more violent language. How many of us, when we cut somebody off on the freeway, will respond to their response with violent words or gestures? How many of us can go on the internet and when something comes to us as violent or unkind, will respond with more violence or more unkind language? Jesus makes it clear in this passage that every human act has consequences, now and in eternity. All of us are born into a world of brokenness, tears, bloodiness, but our lives are more than this. We are not animals. We can do things other than respond to specific situations. We're baptized into a world of the kingdom of God, where we are members of God's holy people, where we are taught to see and recognize God in everyone. Hard to do, but it can be done. As one of the professors when he was teaching a club class back on the other end of this building said, we know about forgiveness and we know about reconciliation. We just don't want to do it. So, Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? Our gardens grow and blossom when we bring our internal desires in line with God's expectation. When we risk loving God with all our hearts, all our minds, all our strength, all our souls, and love our neighbors as we love ourselves. Is your garden growing? Is your garden prospering? Amen.